Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable. So, a very interesting superhero movie because it is not to be the normal Marvel, DC, whatever kind of thing. It's like its own story, its own little thing that is to go off and eventually become a movie franchise without us really realizing it. Going on and coincidentally just so happens to see a movie of a title called Split. I'd gone on and found out, oh my god, like this movie is actually a sequel to Unbreakable, and then we go on past that point in order to go on to Glass. I'm like, oh my god, like now we're combining all these characters, trying to create some kind of interesting story out of all this, and really going on and in Glass, going on and technically giving us a sequel from this film, technically. But overall, it's really a franchise, but still, it does feel like Glass, much more so than Split, is really a actual sequel to this character. And a lot of people would have their own thoughts about the sequel films. A lot of people go on to say that they don't like Split, they don't like Glass. They would rather just take this movie and just enjoy it for what it is and nothing else, because some people have their opinions about certain kind of things, and that's perfectly fine. So we have David Dunn here that is to have come, who is to come off as an everyman, which I kind of like about that. Like an everyman that doesn't have a huge cluster of powers, and it seems to be very common Ash-like powers that would make him be this superpower being without us really realizing it, because it doesn't seem like he has laser vision or he has some kind of goofy power that would go on with the numbers of which that he already or the powers of which that he already has. We go on and find out that this character throughout this film is to have the inability to either be harmed or to either be ill. We also go and find out that this character is to go on and be uh, rigorously strong to the point that there is a deleted scene in the Unbreakable movie where we go on and we of course have uh, David Dunn's character proving even more so that he can kind of really lift a bunch of weights within this gym, and then all of a sudden these college athletes are to come on in and be like, hey, what's going on here? And so David is to kind of sneak out, realizing that he had lifted uh, a huge rack of weights, kind of showcasing that there was to be that scene. But of course, M. Night decided to cut that out because, like, dude, I've already proven, and David had already proven that, like, this guy is to be strong enough. It seems like that scene was kind of a redundant thing that we really didn't need. So, going on and talking about David, now I can go on and talk about Elijah, who is to be David's ally for most of this film. We find out that Elijah is to uh, be a man who, of course, is to be a very brittly boned man of sorts. And we go on and find out that this kid is to be heckled and is to be tormented by a number of kids, calling him Mr. Glass. So we of course have this character who is to eventually in this movie own a comic book store called Limited Edition, and he is to go on and of course desperately want to figure out or find a certain combination of words, and he is to go on and be witness to a number of horrific events, which we'll talk more about in the film, to go on and hear a certain combination of words which he has not yet to hear up until a certain point. So once we have Elijah, who is to hear that certain combination of words, he is to go and seek out this man and is to want to hear his story, his life story, because maybe Elijah will find out something about this man that is to all of a sudden create suspicion about whether or not this guy really could possibly be who he is to possibly have Elijah think that he is to be. So, with that said, I think it's about that customary time for us to just go on into spoilers about this film. I would have to say easily that this movie, I thoroughly enjoy it. Like, I could watch this like a million times and never get tired of this film. I could go on and really just say that this movie is, for even though it's a very slow slog of a film, like I so find it enjoyable to the point where I would just have this like complicating thing of like how high really to grade this. Because I don't think that it's an epic film that just is mind blowing and oh my god, whoa, this film. But I feel like this is definitely maybe a realm of possibly me saying that this is a uh, like a solid good film, or I would probably say that uh, because it's just so enjoyable and it's really like a common man like story, and that's the thing that I like about it. Like we don't really have a clear cut origin of this character. It just seems like this guy is to have the normal day to day story, but then he realizes maybe yeah, maybe I do have uh, superpowers. Maybe I am to be possibly a guy who can go on and defend the city. So and also speaking of powers, he does have this magical touch power, which we will go on and talk about within this film. And so, yeah. Uh, with that said, let's just go into yeah. So, solid, good movie. Like I don't know. I had this very middle of the road of wanting to call it great, even though I could watch this again a million times and never feel bored of it. Um, it's been a while since I've watched either Split or Glass. If it seems that people are interested in this movie, or Split or Glass, I would gladly go and rewatch those because it's been a while since I've seen either one of those films. But at the end of the day, I think it's time to just say, let's just go into spoilers. Um, conve- Inconveniently, right now, Unbreakable, I think, is on the Sci Fi app. Dare, in fact, if you want to conveniently find a way to see this movie without paying a dollar or a dime or going into some goofy app somewhere, that, of course, is to be called Sci Fi, because who knows how long that movie is going to be on that app. There, in fact, I can go and recommend you a couple of free options. You can go onto a Google search, and I know how weird that sounds, and go on to letter C movies. So a letter and then a word, and then it's an app, so you can dare, in fact, search for that and be able to go on and find an app that you can uh, dare say, go out of your way to watch any single movie for free, new releases, shows, and all kinds of things. You can also go on and find an app called Fox HD Movies. The logo will say so, the title will say something different upon this app because the title will eventually say Play 1080p HD Movies. And so, like, the logo will say Fox HD Movies. But at the end of the day, with the powers combined of both those apps, you should pretty much be able to see anything. you can go on to an app from the Google Play Store that's called TV Crush, and really with that you should go on and pretty much with all those apps you can pretty much see anything that you want. Any movies that you wouldn't be able to see, especially if you haven't uh, had a Apple TV, whatever goofy app that you would need to go and see. So, with that said, let's go into Unbreakable. So let's go into that. If I haven't already, let's just go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I get to spoil this movie. Hopefully, I'm able to go and talk about every single bit of this film, because I feel like it's a slow movie and I should easily know everything. But that's the whole thing where it's like, yeah, it should be easy. A caveman could use it, and then I go on and freaking like, yeah, I forgot like 4 things. So, the beginning of this film, of course, is to be featured a Philadelphia department store in 1961, where, of course, we are to have a pregnant Elijah's mother. So, Samuel Jackson's character, who's Elijah, is to have a mother who is pregnant with him because Elijah's mother evidently doesn't have a name in this film for whatever goofy reason. So, we have a Dr. Matheson who is to go on and see that this woman is to be in this this dressing room. And so they go on, and I guess there is to be some store worker who had delivered this child, and Dr. Matheson is going on and saying, like, well, like, did you drop this child? Because we, of course, go on and have Dr. Matheson kind of inspecting the child, and we have Elijah's mother that's going on and asking, it's like, should this baby be screaming like this? We have Dr. Matheson going and explaining to us that this baby's both arms and legs are broken. Because his store clerk was to go on and tell us that, like, yeah, the baby, it was an easy birth. Like, the baby just wanted to just fly on out. So, yeah, we find out that this guy is to realize that this baby's arms and legs are broken. So I'm like, oh my god. So, because we go on and find out later on in the film, because of course Elijah explains this, that he has a astrogenesis imperfecta type 1. He goes on and explains eventually to David that there are a number of cases, and there are a certain number of cases that don't last very long because their bones are far too brittle. And so, yeah. So let's go on to more of this film. So, we now transition to, of course, showcasing David Dunn, and he, of course, is on the 177 East Rail train. So we have David here, who's going on and is to be looking at the peering little girl in the train, as he's kind of at first kind of putting his head next to this window, and then he goes on, is like, well, like, hey, little girl, I'm gonna make funny faces at you and whatever. So all of a sudden, we, I guess, go to a stop at this train, to all of a sudden have a girl named Kelly who is to ask David if it's possible for her to sit next to him, and he's like, sure, go ahead. We have David who's going and taking off his wedding ring, putting it into his pocket without this girl, I guess, supposedly realizing it. Because I know that might seem like a horrible thing, like, oh my god, this guy is taking off his wedding ring, and so on and so forth. David and Audrey are actually having quote unquote problems. Problems so much so that it seems that both of them, um, like, they have a thing where they can go on and see other people. Because Audrey eventually is to ask David if he has gone and seen anybody, and David, of course, is to say no, I haven't seen anybody. So, but back to the story. So, David is going on talking to Kelly, and because David is trying to break the ice by saying like, "Hey, I have this this one ladies magazine. Like, any interest?" And Kelly's like, "Nope. Give me the sports magazine." And David's like, "Oh, you like sports?" And she's like, "Yep." So it seems that Kelly is to be some scout of sorts, and it seems that there is to be a guy that is to uh, be a god as far as football is to be said, where he can kind of run uh, pretty quickly, and he's going to be a god, and so on and so forth. And so David goes on, and he's like, "Well, hey, like, if you're going and scouting anybody, like, do you need any swimmers? I'm a little afraid of water. Like, is that can be a problem?" And so we of course have David who asks Kelly like, "How long are you be in Philadelphia?" And Kelly's like, I'm married." He's like, "No, like, that's great." And Kelly's like, "Yeah, I think I'm gonna go find somewhere else to sit." And he's like, "I don't think you understood what I meant." And then Kelly just starts like running off basically. And David's just like, "Well, I'm just gonna pop back on my wedding ring and just take a little nap, a little nappy poo." So we push on here, and so this train, of course, is to be going on to have a accident. So we of course have David's son Joseph, who is to be watching the news as he's kind of flipping through a bunch of things here. He all of a sudden is to realize that the 177 uh, East East Rail, heaven forbid you say the correct things. East Rail, there we go. East Rail train is to, of course, had a accident, and so Joseph is going on and is to see this post-it note saying what uh, train David had came in on, and it's the same one. So we have David that's going and like gaining consciousness at this hospital, and so all of a sudden we have this ER doctor that's going and asking David. It's like, okay, where were you in the train? Like, and he mentions that he's in one of the cars, and we had the ER doctor telling David, it's like, well, did you move at any point? Like, did you go to any certain section of the, like, what did you do? And the guy's like, I was just in one spot and I never moved. And so David is just looking at this ER doctor, and David's like, why are you looking at me like that? And the ER doctor is telling David there's two reasons why he's looking at him like that. One is that there is to be another patient that was to be alive out of um, this whole accident, and he's going to be dying soon. And the second reason is that David doesn't have a single scratch on him. He is completely and utterly unharmed from this whole situation, and that really makes no sense to him. So we go on, we have David, who, of course, is walking away after getting a clean bill of health, and he is, of course, going and clutching into the arms of really just Joseph, because we have it to where kind of Audrey and Dave or David are still kind of at this like kind of phase where they're just like, yeah, we're just kind of putting on a show for their son, but like they're like they're not really feeling love tonight, so to speak. So we go on. We have David, who is to eventually go on and is to get a note upon his car, his vehicle, that is to say, how many sick days have you ever had? David thought that was a kind of weird question. Plus, also, it was kind of weird to have this limited edition kind of card thing on his car. That seemed kind of weird. So, but David kind of after getting this card, he's starting to feel more hopeful that at some point maybe someone is to have an answer out there for David in the world, because we have it to where David is to wake up every day and feel sad. And there's a lot of times when David is going through his life with Audrey and with his son Joseph, and he's like, you know what, this just isn't right. Toward David is to explain that to Audrey when David and Audrey are to go on and have this date, when they're going on and talking about their favorite color, which is brown and rust, and that Audrey is to mention that she is to love a Prince song and all this kind of stuff. But we're getting way ahead of ourselves. Let's pull back a little bit. So, but at least I have most of that event covered. So, and we also have David mentioning how David realized this relationship wasn't working out the moment that David was wanting to, or was realizing that he had a nightmare one night and didn't wake up Audrey to have her comfort him. And that's when he realized that this relationship was over. Like, you know what would have been really interesting? What that dream was. What if we would have found out that Audrey was cheating on David? Man, what would that have been? Or maybe Audrey had gone on and done something horrible or something bad or something like some kind of something, and man, would that would have been like a crazy reveal by the end of this show, and then David just let it slide. Wouldn't that have been interesting? But like we never really saw, or we never really understood what that whole thing was. But again, we also have to where David doesn't have that touch power yet, and he hasn't like worked it out as often. So let's back up a little bit. So David, of course, is to go on and is to go and ask his security detail office at uh, the stadium. Of course, he's to ask his superior. Well, he asks his superior through his secretary, and so David is asking how many sick days that he has ever taken. And supposedly he has had this job for 5 years, And so we have David who's just curiously asking uh, whether he's taken a sick day. So David goes on and he's just kind of watching certain practices, and like he's just kind of like waiting things out. So all of a sudden, David is to get his boss appearing from behind him and saying like, "Hey, like, what did you like after that accident? Did your brain work better?" And David's like, "Oh, hey, what are you talking like? Hey, uh, like what's going on? I just wanted to like catch up." And so his boss goes and tells David it's like 40 bucks an hour. David's like, "What?" It's like 40 bucks an hour, that's all I can give you. And David's like, "What do you mean?" So we find out in 5 years that this guy has never taken a sick day. And that like, hey, like I'm gonna go on and I'm gonna give you a raise because of that. And David's like, "Well, it's not what I was asking for." And so, since David is to realize within 5 years he has not gone on and had a sick day, so we go on, and later in the movie, we of course are, and a little bit later, we have David going and asking Audrey if there's a possibility that he has ever been sick. And so, like, Audrey's just like, "Well, I don't remember you ever getting sick." And David's like, "Isn't that weird? Like I know I haven't been sick this year, but like how can you not remember me ever getting a cold or a flu or something?" She's like, "Well, maybe we're just too tired to remember." And David's like, "I don't know." So we have David that goes on to of course meet Elijah Price at limited edition. So we have Elijah that's going on and seeing a specific buyer who is going to buy a specific item for an infant named Jeb. God, I love this part. So we have this story here where we have this guy who's coming in buying a very expensive item that the kid won't understand the value of it because he's too young to understand this value. And Elijah is to realize that. And so he starts berating in on this guy, saying like I'm sorry, like was there a giraffe that was like plastered outside the the front of this like place? Like was there a machine that when you put quarters in it, like it moves and whatever in the front of this? Like, do I have a name tag anywhere on my body that is to tell you that this is to be a toy store? No? Well, you have gone on and wasted both of our time, especially mine, going and trying to buy this item for an infant named Jeb because he won't appreciate the value of it. And that's the only reason why Elijah will go on and sell things to anybody, because they will appreciate the value of a thing like this. Because Elijah is going on and on about how he loves the image of these two characters because it's the realism of it all. It's the best part of it. And afterwards, the comic book company was to jazz up the colors and exaggerate things, and just was to make the story just look more goofier. Where like this rough draft drawing is to look more real. So Now let's get to this story. We, of course, have Elijah, and this, of course, is 1974 in West Philadelphia. Elijah is going on and is, of course, sitting on this chair, and he, of course, is to have broken his arm again, or had broken an arm. So we, of course, have Elijah who's just sitting next to this TV because he doesn't want to go outside. He doesn't want to go on and do anything because we have it to where there are kids that'll go on and realize that this kid is who he is. So it's like, hey, let's go and break another bone out of this guy, and because he breaks like glass. So we have Elijah's mother that's like, well, you know what? Like, even if you are to just sit here, like, you could accidentally just trip and fall and break something else. Like, there's no way that you can't avoid this at this point. Like, no matter what you do, you're gonna fall and trip and break something. Even if you're like, you're gonna fall right into the TV screen and just break something off. So Elijah's mother is going on and telling Elijah to uh, to make his way outside to this park bench because there's going to be a gift waiting out there for him. So Elijah is to go on and have these binoculars and is to see this gift. To where Elijah's going on and like, well, hey, like somebody's gonna go and steal that gift. And Elijah's mother's like, well, you better get out there soon then. So Elijah gets out to this bench, and so we have Elijah's mother that's saying like, hey, I bought a whole bunch of these, and so every time you go out here, there'll be another book waiting out here. So, and supposedly she said that this is a good, this is supposedly a good issue. So we go on here, and we of course have it where David and Joseph are to arrive to this limited edition store. I want to say it's a store, but like feels more like a gallery to me. It's a very kind of high end comic book stuff because we have, of course, like the rough drafts of what is to be a comic book, like, and I'm just like, man, like we have like some like really expensive high end comic book stuff here. So we have David Dunn who's talking to Elijah and saying that he had received some card on the like he had received some card from this store, and Elijah's like, well, great, you have a mailbox. And David is to go on and say, well, mine was on the hood of my car. Elijah was like, oh, so you're him. So Elijah is to sit both David and Joseph down and is to tell him his story about his discovery. Elijah is to realize that at some point there had been a number of things that had been scribbled through the years, drawn through the years, and that maybe there might be some like real legitimacy to any number of these things, to where we can go on and have any like god of the past maybe be a real living thing in the present, really telling us that maybe at some point, maybe even something as simple as comic books, there could be some real life counterpart to that. There might be some real thing that could go on and tell us that there is to really be a superhero in their lives. Is what I'm hugely paraphrasing here, but I want to kind of like layman's terms it down. So we go on and we have Elijah that's starting to ask David's like, have like, how sure of you that you've never been sick? And David's like, well, 75%. And he's like, well, like, that's hole number one, because freaking like that doesn't seem all that sure. We of course have Elijah who asked David, have you ever been injured? And Joseph is to mention that uh, David had been injured and was never to again be able to play football. And Elijah's like, well, that's hole number two, and that's a big one. So, because Elijah is going to be very skeptical about all this. So, we go on and we have it where, of course, Elijah is to rattle off that there had been a number of situations where there, of course, was a bombing on an airplane. There had been a burning of a hotel. And there had been also a attack upon David's train. And he had been waiting for a certain combination of words and never heard it until that whole train situation. We go on and later in this movie are to also go and find out that there were stories about a mudslide in Mexico, and like I guess there had been a number of scenarios that were to go on and play out here, which now is to have me be so tempted to just realize that if they were to ever go on and do other movies of this, like, would we tie into those events somehow? Would we go on and have like prequel things to tie a number of these characters in? Um, could be. You never know. Just in case they want to kind of just use some characters to make them the next uh, adding franchise part of this movie, or maybe they just want to start all over again when M. Night wants to go and like scratch that superhero itch, so to speak. So, so we go on here, and we of course have it where uh, Elijah is to mention his condition to David, and is mentioning that he, of course, is on one side of the spectrum, and he has always ever wanted to go and find out the other side of things, where he can go and find a person who doesn't get sick, doesn't get hurt. And so we have David going and telling Joseph to don't take another sip of that water, and is to go and put it in the trash. So David is going on and telling Elisha here that he's seen people like him at his work, where people that can go on and tell them this lavish story, then go on and ask for their credit card information, just down payment, so on and so forth. So we of course have it toward David is basically telling Elijah here that he used to be some con artist, that he used to be some uh, snake salesman or something like that. So as David, of course, is walking off, not really truly believing Elijah could go and make David into some kind of superhero like character, we have David walking off, and as David is to walk off, we have Elisha who's going on and asking David, where does he work? Going on and telling him that he, of course, is to be a security guard at this arena, or this stadium. So that makes Elisha just scratch his head even more so, just like, that sounds interesting. So we go on and we have, of course, David who goes to his security job at the stadium. And so we go on and we find that Elijah is to not have the best ticket at the stadium. and that he wants to go and talk to David. So Elijah is to be pulling David aside to go on and to ask him. It's like, you know what? Out of all the jobs that you could have had, like you could open up your own gym, you could have gone on and done any number of a million things, and you chose to protect people as a job. And like out of all the things you could have done, so and we of course have it where Elijah is like, you know what? Why is that? Why did you choose this one job? So we go on and we find out that it seems that David is to have this special ability, which when Elijah is to go on and possibly get this ticket from David, uh, and to not actually go and use it because he's going to go on instead to try and uh, see if this special ability is to be correct or not. Because we have David who bumps into this one guy, and so David all of a sudden is to be gearing up for all these people coming in 10 minutes before kickoff. And so we go on, and we of course have this guy in this camouflage jacket. David goes on and is to start having his other guys start to do pat downs. And so David is going on and telling Elijah that to discourage people from carrying guns, they go and have pat downs. And so we have it where, of course, David is to think that there is to be a possibility that this one guy is to be holding. And so if he will be holding, he's going to go on and get out of line. And he does. So we have David going and giving Elijah this nosebleed ticket that I guess he won't get spit on. So Elijah is, of course, now asking David, like, hey, why is it that you were going and trying to put together pat downs? And we had David going on and having this story about, like, well, the team's not doing well, and like people could get angry and maybe go on and hurt people because their team isn't doing well, because a lot of people can get drunk and whatever. So, but we have David who is to describe the exact gun and the exact position where when Elijah is going into investigating this later on, is to find out that this uh, specific gun and specific position of the gun is to be identical to the thing of which that David was to talk about, because Elijah needed to know. So, because Elijah leaves to chase after this man to go down these flight of stairs, has him trip and fall and crack some bones yet again, having him fall down this flight of stairs, forcing him to go on to this hospital, and again hear all of these breaks that he is to be forced to go in on, and go on to do this thing called therapy or rehab therapy, whatever you want to call it. So we have Elijah who goes on and is to seek out therapy, coincidentally, with Audrey. So we, of course, go on and have Elijah who's asking Audrey all these questions because he's nervous. So we have Audrey trying to explain some of these machines that, of course, Elijah is going to use, but then we have Elijah who's also asking, of course, Audrey how she and her husband had met. So we have Audrey who is to explain that her and her husband had met via this car accident, and Elijah's like, "Ooh, you're gonna have to tell me more." So we of course have Audrey that goes on and is to explain that uh, coincidentally her husband was, of course, to be this star athlete that was to play football, and coincidentally, this car accident was to take him out of football, and they went on and had gone and got married, and everything worked out. And so we, of course, have Elijah who's like, well, like, so, like, do you have something against football or like what? So Audrey goes on and is to explain that football is a very violent sport, that eventually the thing about football is you have to go on and punish your opponent, and like it just seems too violent, and something that uh, Audrey just didn't see herself to have a man uh, that uh, she didn't think she was going to fall in love with a man like that who was to want to welcome violence, I guess, by playing a vicious sport of football that has a number of things called padding. Like, if he was a boxer, or if he was a bare knuckle brawler or something like that, then I could understand that. But like, this guy is to just be a football player. It's a very common sport. So we then have it where Elijah is to accidentally slip and say, like, well, what part of David's body was injured during that car accident? And we go on and we have Audrey who's like, well, what was to say that my husband's name was David, because she never said that. So Elijah is to go on and say that he knows about David and he knows about his survival. And so Elijah is to rattle off that he had seen a number of heinous acts. He is to have gone on and seen the 737 airplane be bombed. He is to go on and uh, see a hotel downtown go and get burned. He is to go on and see the 177 East Rail train get derailed, and so on and so forth. He has witnessed all these, and he realized that David is to have survived out of all these numerous people that had all died. So we go on and we have, of course, Elijah who explains all of this to Audrey, hoping that she will keep an open mind about all this in the future. But we really have it to where we turn around and have really just Audrey who's just kind of like, oh no, like this seems just kind of weird. This seems like very odd that this guy was to go out of his way to find David through his his wife. So we go on here and we of course have David that is making his way home to, of course, meet up with his son. And so we have Joseph that is going and wanting David to play football, and David's like, no, I don't think so. We, of course, have some guy who is out there who is to possibly be David's equal, and Joseph kind of wants to see if David can match up to this guy. So David has no real interest. He's going to go and work out. And Joseph's like, well, even better. I'm going to go with my dad and we're going to work out. So we have Joseph go and add a bunch of weight plates to, of course, uh, this bar. and it's been a while since I've gone on in any gym jargon, so it's been a while. So we go on and we have, of course, David, who's starting to do these, of course, bench presses, and he is to realize that it seems that Joseph had put far too much on there. It's 250 some odd pounds. And I'm just like, okay, like, it doesn't really seem like that seems like like, I haven't done that in a while, but like to me, that seems like the average like weight to put on there. But like I'm just saying like, hey, that's still really impressive because like an average person probably isn't over like 300 pounds. So take it with what you will. Plus, really, if you are a certain height and size, like, and you're basically bench pressing your weight, then that's impressive. Uh, and plus, like, heaven forbid, I would be able to do any number of any exercises whatsoever because it's been such a long time since I've gone on and done that kind of stuff. Because I've already proven that I've done it once, so why should I go back and have to just like what do I really have anybody to prove to besides myself? So we go on and we have David, who is to put more on there, and so we go on and have them continue to put more and more on there to where they're duct taping paint cans onto this bench press. So we go on and we find David is just lifting absurd amount of weight, to the point where David is saying that this is the most that he's ever lifted, and David is telling Joseph that, like, if something ever happens, call mom. So David is going and bench pressing this stuff like it's nothing, and like he's like, all right, like okay. So because they go on and they basically take and put all of it, which is basically mean like take every single weight plate that they have and stack it onto this rack. So yeah. So we have it to seem that David is to be this the strong man, but we have it to where, of course, David to also have this special ability, and so we go on and later have it to where Elijah is going to tell David that he has this special ability to touch somebody and can see things. And so he should go on and figure out a way to use that ability at some point. And we have it where David is to go and kind of bump into people, and David at one point is to see this one stadium drug dealer that's going and kind of like made some kind of handoff. And so David is going on and wanting to pat this guy down to find out that the drugs are not on him. I guess we aren't going to win every single time here. We find out that this drug dealer is none other than M. Night Shyamalan, because of course we have the joke of M. Night going on and being involved in every single one of his films, and so of course we're going to have this character consistently keep on appearing, and usually he's a different character every single time. He's going to eventually be in the other movies as well as some kind of character. So that crazy character. Anyways, so we push on here. So at some point we have Joe, and I'm going to start bouncing around a lot. Like none of this is going to be at all perfect. So it is what it is. Oh well. Because there's a mix mosh of a bunch of things here. So we of course have uh, David at work who's getting a call that his son Joseph is to be hurt and that he's going to go on and need to retrieve Joseph. So David goes to this school and is to go on and talk to this nurse. And we, of course, have it where David is to mention the school nurse. It's like, well, Audrey usually handles this stuff, all the Joseph stuff. So the school nurse is saying to David, it's like, well, hey, like, uh, it's been a while since I've seen you. Like, don't you remember me? I used to have red hair. And David's like, no. So the school nurse is going on and telling David about this story about this kid who had drowned in that pool. And really, since that story is to be this lore in the school, that it keeps the kids from horse playing in the pool because they'll remember that story about the kid that drowned. So David is to go, like I had been sick once. Because, of course, Joseph is to talk to David and say that it's like, well, like I thought I could be like you, you know? Like I thought I could be like super strong and whatever because like these kids were just kind of like messing with me and uh, messing around. So I just decided like I thought I could be like you. And David goes on and tells Joseph, like, well, uh, like you're just like me. Like we're the same. And so we have it where, of course, Joseph is to want to prove that David is to be who he is by shooting David. And so now we go on and we have David who's like, you're going to be in big trouble. I am your father. And you're going to put that gun down. So we, of course, have David who is, of course, telling Joseph that if this bullet just bounced right off of him, that he's going to leave for New York because he thought him and Joseph were being friends for real. So we have it where Joseph does not pull the trigger, and so David is to be relieved of relieving this gun away from Joseph. And so now David is to go on and run off to Elijah to tell him it's like, hey, don't don't talk to my family anymore. Leave me alone. Like my kid almost killed me last night. And David is to realize that, or David is to go and tell Elijah this story about these kids kind of fooling around and he was getting dunked in the water and he swallowed some water and he almost died. But like he spent a week in the hospital, like trying to recover from pneumonia. So Elijah is realizing, like, well, I guess David is human after all, and so Elijah, now injured, is to go on and is to be in this comic book store, and we of course have this comic book clerk who's wanting to go on and get food. So Elijah is to be just kind of carted out. Or all of a sudden Elijah, who is just mad that he can't go on and find his superhero, that he starts bashing through all this stuff. And we of course have the store clerk that's saying like, "Hey man, like I'm gonna call the police on you." All of a sudden Elijah is to knock this one comic book into his lap about a character called Sentryman. So we of course have Elijah's like, hey, I'm gonna buy this. Like, I'll buy this and I'll get out of here. So we have Elijah that's going and leaving a message to David while David is going on his date with, of course, Audrey, because Audrey is to say that since David was to go and uh, like survive from that train wreck, that she wants to go and start out like she wants to go and start again, but like she wants to like basically like start from the beginning, and like as if this is like a brand new couple basically. So we go through the date and they like explain all this stuff that I've kind of already explained. So when they get home, we of course have this girl who's saying like, well, it seems like David is to go on and get some security job in New York. Didn't know you guys were going to leave for New York. And Audrey's like, well, not all of us are going to leave. So this girl's like, okay, got to get out of here then. So the other message that this girl was to mention that they were to have was, of course, Elijah, saying that, of course, there was to be this story that brought him back and made him realize that every single superhero has to have a weakness. And David, or Elijah, is to realize that David's weakness is actually just water. That if he is to go on and like swallow it too fast, he'll choke. So we go on and we find out that that is David's kryptonite, simply water. So we go on and we of course have it where David is to now want to figure it out for himself, because Elijah is to also tell David when David wants him to stop talking to him. Elijah tells David, it's like, you know what? I don't think that you did get injured. And you just took the easy way out so you could stop playing football because you wanted to win Audrey over by stop playing football, because love is forever. Like football is just 10 years, but like you would have had Audrey and you would have had her. So David is to basically just stop kidding himself, and David is to go on and read this newsletter about uh, about that car accident. So David is to go on to this junkyard, or this kind of this spot where, of course, this car still is to be held there, and David is to remember this accident and realize that he was never actually hurt during that car accident. That I guess he just convinced himself that he was hurt, but he wasn't. So we have David going on and calling Elijah and saying that he was never injured during that car accident, and that what should he do now? So we go on and we of course have and I'm hope at this point we've kind of covered everything, because I feel like I feel pretty good about my chances about covering everything at this point. So we go on and we have David, who is to be forced to go out somewhere where there's a lot of people, and Elijah's saying like, hey, like it's okay for you to get scared, because like this isn't like the normal comic book panels, because this is real life. So David's to go on and start to go to this train station or this bus station or something like that, some kind of station of sorts, and it's to start just having people just smack into him. So we go on and we have David, who is to see a number of scenarios that he is to see someone do. David is to go on and see, of course, a woman shoplifting. We have a fraternity guy who is to take advantage of a girl in some frat party. Uh, we uh, we go on and then have David, who is to spot a guy who I guess was to go on and kill some man and throw him down this flight of stairs. And we find out that this guy is to go on and hold up these people at their house. So David is to wait for this guy to wrap things up for the day. We don't actually have this guy who has a legitimate name in this story. He's basically just being called like Orange Suit Guy, Orange Suit Man. That's all he really is to be called here. So we have David who follows this guy home to go on to sneak in there to go and rescue these two kids. And so David goes on to try and rescue this woman, to have this orange suit man go and kick David and have him go flying into this pool tarp. And then David starts falling through the pool. And like, oh no, this is where he's gonna die. And no, he doesn't, because of course he doesn't, because if he's in other movies, that would tell you that he lives here. So David is starting to drown in this pool. All of a sudden, we have a stick coming from one of these kids to pull him out. So David is to go on and make it out of this pool with this nice little the theme song of this movie, basically. So David is to go on and is to make his way back into this place where we, of course, had this guy who's spitting on this woman. So we go on and we have David who is going and kind of rear naked choking, of course, this orange suited guy. Going and choking him out so much so that this guy is banging this guy against this wall, leaving a big, huge hole in this wall, and just thrashing around, kind of like elbowing him into the back, but that does jack crap nothing. To where David is just locking more and more just this thing in, to where he's like torquing on the freaking choke, to where this guy is to, of course, be choked out, and I'm assuming to get killed, but it looks like he's just pretty well and choked. So we have David who goes on and it is to untie this mother for her to just fall over and just to, I guess, have already been dead here. So now we go on into the very next day, and we, of course, have Joseph who's to wake up in the morning. And so we, of course, go on and have Audrey that's mentioning that, you know what, maybe we should go on and not have Elijah like come around here, or we shouldn't see him anymore. And if we do, we should just call the cops. And David and Joseph's like, sure, whatever. So David slides this newspaper to Joseph, and it's of course about an article about a man who is to go on and uh, save two kids while their parents are to, of course, be dead. And so David is looking at Joseph and is like, "You were right, but like, don't say anything to anybody." And Joseph's like, "Okay." So like that's such a great moment in this freaking movie, and like they don't really have to say much of anything. It's just a really great moment. So after this, we of course have David, who's to make it to Elijah's uh, gallery selling his limited edition sale. And so David is talking to Elijah's mother, saying that Elijah was to go through a number of breaks in his life, and he made it to this point, and like he's uh, Elijah's mother is trying to help Elijah with these sales. So we have David who goes and meets up with Elijah, and so now we of course have it where Elijah is to say to David, it's like, well, since we know who you are, I think it's time for us to shake hands. So David is to go and shake hands with Elijah, realizing that he, of course, was the guy, Elijah was, to kill any number of these people, bomb this airplane, go on and find out that there was to be a guy, that is to say, if the first, second, or third floor was to be set ablaze, that that whole entire hotel would have gone up and no one would have gotten out of there alive. And that we see Elijah, who's walking out of this 177 train, realizing that Elijah was the culprit of the problems with that train. So we have David realizing that Elijah had murdered a number of people, and Elijah justifies it that it was all in the sacrifice of finding David, finding him and finding out Elijah's opposite. And that Elijah knew all along that he was going to become this villain because of the kids. They called him Mr. Glass. So, and that Elijah isn't a mistake, and so on and so forth. So, David starts walking off, and so we have kind of like all these setups being told to us, where, of course, Elijah was going to this insane asylum, or this mental hospital, let's just say, a nicer way, and that David was found out about a number of terrorist acts, of course, and so Elijah was put to jail. So, so we go on and we have all this setup and whatever, and the movie is to, of course, end. So with that said, I feel like I've kind of covered everything for this movie. There's something that I've probably forgotten about, because I'm sure there was. Let me know in the comments below. Let me know how you feel about Unbreakable, or how you felt about this movie, because some people will probably hate this film. Some people will love this film. Some people will feel like, it's another movie. But at the end of the day, I could say that I'm going to get out of here to go on and review something else. Uh, really, if you guys want me to go on and review Split or review Glass, I'll see if those things are eventually going to be an important thing for somebody in the distant future. So I will justify going on and watching those and reviewing them at some point. We'll get there. We'll get there. But anyways, I think I'm going to get anywhere but right here with this review. So I'm going to say goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.